Okay, so yeah, then the rest of that association area, so I reach in my pocket, I was saying that, I feel, there's something in there, it's got things, and I can feel like a jagged edge on it and this, and I go, oh, those are keys. Like I know from feeling it. I could have a pocket full of change, and just by feeling it, all those signals of what I'm feeling are going right here. But then in this area is where I'm making sense of it. I feel a coin. Oh, it feels like it's hard, it's round, but it's, it's a nickel, it's a dime, it's a quarter, right? Just by feeling it. That's where you're associating it. We call it an association area, making sense of the information coming in. For auditory, in the temporal lobe, we have a primary auditory cortex where the actual signals from the ear come in. But then we make sense of it. Okay, I hear a voice. Is that a voice I recognize? Is that someone I know? Is that someone saying a word? Does that word make me, or does it make me happy? Does it make me sad? Does it make me angry? That's the association area. Okay, so definitely review that and know what that means and where those areas are. So who can tell me, when we look at a picture like this, here is that post-central gyrus. This is a view of this gyrus right here, okay? So, but we're looking at it, this is one hemisphere, the other hemisphere would be, let's just do this. The other hemisphere, would be like that. We're looking at it this way. So here's the post-central gyrus. What is this? Why is this so distorted, this picture of this person? Why is this hand, this means that, obviously our hands are not that big compared to the rest of our body, our face compared to our whole torso. But this is showing the hand takes up this whole part of this gyrus right here, as opposed to the whole arm only takes up this, the whole torso only takes up this much, but just your thumb takes up almost as much as your whole torso. Your face, the lips and the tongue. Oh, this is the motor one. Let me just go to the sensory one. It looks very similar, but okay. So yeah, the hand takes up this huge part right here. The whole arm, just that, the whole torso. So what does that mean? Why do these parts of the body take up so much more space in the brain? They what? Exactly. The more sensitive a body part is, means the more sensory receptors are there. Literally more neurons in your fingers than like in your entire back. We don't use our back to like feel things and say, oh, what's this? We have so many more. We used to do this little experiment where you took these little needles, or little toothpicks, we're stabbing each other, but you'd have two that are almost exactly touching the tips. And then we'd have some that are just like a millimeter apart, then 2 millimeters, 3, 4. The separation, we do it on your back, like we start. So you do it on your lab partner's back, and you say, tell me when you feel two distinct points. So you touch them at the same time, but when they're this close together, it feels like 1 point. And then you can move them apart, it still feels like 1 point. You get pretty far apart on your back, let's say, because there's only like a couple of neurons supplying that whole area. And it's one neuron feels the point, even though they're very far apart, still feels like one pinprick. And then finally you go, oh yeah, I feel 2 distinct points that you're pressing on my back. But if you do that on the fingertip, you can move them like 1 millimeter apart and you feel 2 distinct points because you have so many more neurons in there. So because there's so many more neurons in these sensitive areas, they take up a bigger part of your brain, of this gyrus. So yeah, your face is very sensitive, the lips, the tongue, genitalia, obviously, the hands, the feet, yeah, to a little bit of a lesser extent. And we all know that these things also, through synaptic plasticity, somebody has their hands, maybe amputated or lose their hands or something, or maybe they're born that way. Their feet would probably, you start using your feet. You ever see that? People can like play guitar with their feet, or, they're using their feet for doing different things. They have, it rewires and takes up a much bigger part of the gyrus. Yeah. That's all right.
People that have sensory issues, this is abnormal. Like they don't have this. It's like the normal baseline.
Yeah.
So people have sensory issues.
Like what? Give me an example, like a sensory deficit for touch.
Not for touch, like anything.
Okay.
Like hearing, or people that they can't feel so much noise and touch at the same time, it gets into overwhelming.
Yeah, I mean, there could be, you know, issues with certain parts of the brain. If you damage the primary area of the brain, let's say for visual, because that's an easy one to think about. If you damage, you know, the primary visual cortex, you can't see anything. Okay, you're blind. But if parts of the visual association area get kind of screwed up from whatever trauma or tumor or just some sort of, you know, autoimmune, you can have trouble making sense of things. You're seeing things that aren't there. You're not processing certain information. You know, I was making that reference to my brother-in-law who was seeing people, but they all had my sister's face. all these other people, and he'd hear their voices, and he'd know it was me. But he's like, why do you have, you know, your sister's face, right? Like, that's weird. So that you can get those weird types of things when you damage these association areas. But when you talk about a sensory deficit of some sort, you got to diagnose it. Is it the sensory receptors? Is the problem in the eye? Is the problem in this part of the brain, that part of the brain, the processing? Is it the nerves making their way there? You could determine that. So now in the frontal lobe, we have right here, we have the primary, let's go to that part. Okay, we have the motor cortex. So it works a little bit differently. In sensory, first we have the primary area, and then we have the association area, right? The information comes in, then we make sense of it. For motor, it's different. We have an association area first, we call it motor association, which is this part of the frontal lobe, where we plan our motor activities. We're saying, okay, I want to say, or I want to walk over there, okay? I'm going to need these muscles to do this first, and that, and this, and these muscles are going to relax, and these are going to contract. Or I want to say a certain word, my lips need to move this way, my tongue that way, my throat this way. All that gets planned, like, okay? And then it sends the signal to, did I do this? It sends the signal from this area to the precentral gyrus, to the primary motor cortex, precentral gyrus. And that is where the actual signals go down your spinal cord out to the muscles of your lips. All right, what do you think?
I spoke to Mara.
Yeah.
Probably somebody changed it. Yes.
Okay, that's fine. They do it.
What maybe?
I'm finished at 10:45.
Do you want to tell me the times after that?
I don't think so. You guys, some of you guys stick around after class here. Is there a class right after us? Actually, sometimes
Definitely.
I feel like one of the days, Monday or Wednesday, there are some people here, but I think that should be fine, at least till 11.
All right, so from 10 to 11.
Okay,
All right.
I appreciate it. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. No worries.
All right.
We'll make it work.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so the precentral gyrus sends the signal, sends the plan. It's like, okay, order up. Here's what we need to do. Here's the muscles we're going to move in just this way, and then the signals come out to your lips, to your whatever muscles there. So we have this other kind of funny looking motor homunculus. Homunculus means like the little man, because this picture is just in every anatomy textbook. So this is now the precentral gyrus, again, of the frontal lobe. And we have this funny looking guy. Again, he's got the big face, a really big tongue. The tongue takes up a lot of space here. The hands again, feet. Notice I don't see the genitalia there like I saw in the sensory one, but same kind of thing. So why did these in motor, why are these areas so much larger? Why does the hand take up so much more space than, let's say, like the entire thigh, which is much stronger, right? It doesn't have to do with the strength of the muscle. That can't be. Because those leg muscles are much stronger than the muscles in my hand.
I mean, motor units.
The more motor units, which means for more what? When we have more strings on our little puppet, that means we have more what? Fine control, fine motor control. You have not more muscles, not bigger muscles in my fingers, but I have more neurons going to those muscles, because remember, each neuron can go to like a certain number of muscle cells. So maybe there's like, 100 neurons going into this thumb, and each one of them is controlling a bunch of muscle fibers so that I can get very, very fine control. So for the sensory one, it's the more sensitive the area is, the more neurons come from that area. It takes up a bigger part of your brain. For motor, the more motor units or motor neurons, somatic motor neurons go into that part for fine motor control. Think about the puppet, more strings to pull and get all that fine movement. Your lips, your tongue for speaking. The hands and fingers, obviously. Facial muscles, we make very subtle facial expressions. Okay, so that's an important concept for you guys to review. And again, if you're coming in late and you haven't watched those videos yet, make sure you watch the videos I posted. I go over all of this. A great example of how this kind of works are these two areas that you need to know for language and speaking and writing language, okay? So the first area is called Wernicke's area, which is a sensory area. And we see it's right here in the left hemisphere in the temporal lobe. Okay, this is not bilateral. This is one of the things where I talk a little bit about cerebral lateralization. You ever heard people say, oh, I'm definitely right-brained as opposed to left-brained? You know, right-brained being more like, you know, art and more sort of abstract thinking, and left is more categorical, and language is on this side. Anyway, Wernicke's area is a sensory area. So that's going to bring in information either from visual, I'm reading something on a screen or a book, I'm hearing someone speaking and making sense of it. Okay, that I hear something, it's words, it's English, I understand, it's a voice I recognize, they're saying something to me, and now I want to respond to what they're saying. Okay, so that all happens in Wernicke's area, recognizing spoken and written language, and we're already associating it. This is like kind of double, because we have visual information, we have auditory information, whatever it is, but this is like part of an association where we're making sense. This is the language I'm hearing. I'm hearing words, I'm reading words, I understand them, and I even could start thinking about, oh, I want to say this back. I want to respond by saying this, or this makes me feel this way, or whatever. That's here. Then I want to say something. You want to speak, you want to write. We have Broca's, Broca's area. Notice Broca's is in a motor area. It's in the frontal lobe. Again, just in the left hemisphere. And this is where we plan the motor part of speech or writing, okay? So I want to respond to them. This is where I make the motor program. This is how I'm going to move my lips. This is how I'm going to move my tongue. This is how and then that goes to the precentral gyrus from there. And then that's going to go out to your, say I'm going to speak something to my mouth and my throat and so on. So this is an example of some of the technology that we have now that we can see what part of the brain is active at any given moment using a PET scan. There's other types, there's functional MRIs and real time, where this is, and I did this in the video, so if you watched it, I'm repeating myself here, but it's a good example of sensory and motor processing. So they put a person in a dark room, you just say, you're going to sit in a dark room, very little, they want to keep all the other input quiet, so no lights, no sounds, no smells, hopefully, you know, and things like that. So that it's really, and what they use is they're able to inject in your body this glucose that is tagged, that can be picked up. It's have like a radio, you know, marker that can be picked up by this. So we can see which part of the brain is using more energy, using more glucose. That's how they see which part of the brain is active. And they say, okay, we're going to flash a word on a screen, and you just say the first word that comes to your mind. You ever do that, like word association, first thing that comes to your mind. So the person sitting in a dark room, the brain hopefully is very quiet, nothing going on. And then they show the word car right here. Oops. They show the word car. Occipital lobe, right? Visual, you're seeing the word. Okay, visual lights up. A little bit of right? That's primary. Let me do this. Okay, so like primary visual, and then a little visual association. Okay, I see a word. It's, okay, seeing what it is. But then Wernicke's right here. Wernicke's area, now you're understanding, okay, that's the word car. I've seen that word before. I'm getting an image in my head of a car, and I'm supposed to be thinking, what's the first thing that comes to my mind? So you already conceive of the word drive right there. That's enough. In that area, you understand the word car. It's an English word. I've seen it before. I'm thinking of the word drive. Then, right after we see, and obviously they slow this down and they review it and look at each slide. This is right when the word came up. This is, you know, a couple milliseconds later. Broca's area lights up. Now the motor area, because you already conceived the word drive, you don't want to say it now. They told you to say it. So Broca's area, all the way in the frontal lobe, is compiling the motor program in order to speak the word drive, to speak. And then it's going to send it right back to the precentral gyrus, right? The primary motor cortex, precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe, And that's where the signals are going to come down to and go out to the muscle, and you say the word, to the lips, the tongue, and so on. Okay, so it's pretty cool how we can see what the brain is doing and what part of the brain does what, whereas way in the past, before this, you would have to say, oh, someone, got hit in the back of the head and lost their vision, that must be for vision, or this part of the brain had a tumor in it on it, and that explains why we lost the sense of smell or the sense of hearing. Okay, what else here? I got it. Okay, so, lateralization, very, very general here. You just know what that really means. You don't need to know exactly what each side is doing. What that whole first part was talking about was the cortex, the very outer part of the brain right here, the cortex. And the white matter is just the axons going from one place to another, right? Myelinated axons. So know the three types, they're highlighted right there. Again, just watch the video. Okay, let me see. Okay, we talk about the spinal cord. Definitely review this diagram. Know the parts of the spinal cord, the anatomy of the spinal cord. Definitely going to put that on the test. Going to be questions about this. It's all listed right here, but you can see the pictures. I put a couple of them. Okay, the different parts you can see. So definitely note that. The meninges. Know the layers of the meninges. They're the same as the brain, right? Dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Dura, arachnoid, pia. And then, under the arachnoid matter, subarachnoid space. Under the dura, the subdural space. Okay, I want you to also know the differences between the spinal meninges and the cranial meninges. Remember, the cranial meninges, the outer layer of the dura mater is right on the inside of your skull, the periosteal layer of the dura mater. That's not the case in the spinal cord. You have some space called the epidural space outside of the dura mater in the spinal cord. It's not right on the inside of the bone. There's space there. Okay, this diagram. Definitely know this, all right? A cross-section of the spinal cord. I go through it in lots of detail in the video. Go through each part. What does it mean? We have the white matter around the outside. Those are columns. Those are signals going up and down the spinal cord. Gray is stuff going across at this level. So again, I'm repeating myself from the video, which I said I wasn't going to do. But let's say a signal comes in here. This is from like a touch receptor in your finger or whatever. It's going to come all the way up your arm. It's going to end up in the spinal nerve that goes into those little holes in the side of your spinal column. And you tell me, who watched the video, which way is this going to go? Is it going to go dorsal or is it going to go ventral? Which way is sensory information going to go?
Isn't it ventral?
Dorsal. Okay, sensory goes this way, and it's one of those neurons, like a unipolar neuron. The cell body is right here, not at the very end there. And then it's going to go this way, okay? And maybe it comes in like that. Okay, motor information, we'll do that in blue. Okay, motor, maybe a motor signal starts here, the cell body is here. It's going to go through the ventral root, and then into the spinal nerve and the nerve going down your arm. Those are mixed. They have sensory and motor neurons in them. Remember, each neuron can only carry information one direction, but a nerve can have thousands of neurons, some of them sensory, some of them motor. Just like this spinal nerve right here. It's got some motor going this way, okay, and sensory coming in, obviously, the other way, okay, going this way. Now, the way when you look at this picture, just to make sure, get your bearings, look for this bulge right here. The bulge is in the dorsal part of the spinal nerve. It's called the dorsal root. This is the dorsal root, sensory only. Okay, ventral root is motor only. Spinal nerve right here is mixed, meaning it's got sensory and motor. Okay. Then you can say, oh, here we call the gray matter. We have the dorsal horns. These are like the dorsal horns and the ventral. Dorsal horns have sensory information coming into them. Ventral horns are here. They have motor coming out. Okay, so just review, know the diagram, know the parts, the ventral and dorsal root. They come together to form the spinal nerve. Let's see. It's all described here. Why is that so small? Yeah, I even like use little animations to kind of show you the different parts here. There's the central part, the central commissure or great commissure with the central canal that has cerebrospinal fluid. Remember the fourth ventricle of the brain with the CSF? It goes all the way down the spinal cord. And it goes right, it's right in there. Okay, so make sure you're reviewing all this. Now the white matter that you see me highlighting here, these are called columns. We have the and you would know, these are the dorsal columns. How do you know that? Well, there's the dorsal root ganglion, there's dorsal. These are vertical, these are columns. These are going like up to the brain or coming down, you know, these are fibers going up and down the spinal cord. So maybe like a neuron comes down the brain, then it's gonna go to here, maybe synapse with a neuron that goes out the root that way, you know, sometimes cool, that way, okay? So watch the video I made and also the study area. These are just a map. You do not need to know all these, but these are various named, we call them tracts, okay, that are bundles of neurons. Remember, this is in the central nervous system, the spinal cord. We don't call them nerves, even though they're bundles, like, you know, of neurons coming from a similar location, going to a similar location, carrying similar types of information, but you don't see them. You don't see them separate from one another. This diagram just shows a schematic of where they would be. The only thing I really want you to know is by its name. If the name of a tract, this one is called the reticulospinal tract, corticospinal, tectospinal. These are areas of the brain. The tectum, you don't need to know them really. The vestibular apparatus, the cortex, cortico. If it ends in spinal, means it's going from the brain, a part of the brain, to the spinal cord, the cortex to the spinal cord, the reticular formation to the spinal cord, again, reticulospinal, corticospinal. That means that it's going from the brain to the spinal cord. That means it's motor, okay? These are descending. A descending tract has to be motor. It's coming from the brain down and it's gonna go out. Whereas sensory columns, sensory tracts, start with the word spino. Spino to the cerebellum, spino to the thalamus. These have funky names in the back for a part of the brain, but spinothalamic. These are going to be ascending, afferent, or sensory tracts. So just know that. If I give you a name, if it starts with spino, that means it starts in the spinal cord, it's going to that part of the brain. Spinothalamic, cerebellar, whatever. If it ends in spinal, that means it came from the brain to the spinal, that means it's got to be motor. So just keep it simple there. And as I do in the video, I go over, you should definitely know first, second, and third order neurons. Let me just explain this really quick. Let me see, okay. So, yeah, I crossed those out. You don't need to know the specific names of those tracks. So let's just say, and these are just examples, okay? So you just need to know what is meant by a first order neuron, a second order neuron, and a third order neuron in a sensory pathway. So you feel something on the bottom of your foot right here, okay? A little feather. You have a touch receptor. That is the first order neuron, okay? The neuron attached to the receptor that makes its way to the spinal cord. So it goes from the peripheral nervous system, PNS, and it's going to go into, look at it, it goes eventually into the spinal nerve. Notice it goes through the back door, the dorsal root, because it's sensory, goes that way. Goes into the dorsal horn of gray matter right there. And then one of multiple things can happen. Okay, it's going to, at some point in that spinal cord, synapse with a second order neuron. Second order neurons and third order neurons are strictly interneurons, meaning they're only in the nervous system. They're in, the central nervous system. So what can happen is, there's another example on this side. This one comes in, it doesn't synapse yet, but it jumps into one of these white matter tracts and makes its way up. Look, it goes up through the spinal cord. You don't need to know the name of it. Okay, but this is still, in this example, this is still the first order neuron, okay? Still, this is just showing another one coming from the hand, okay, and joining it, but they're in the back there. Still first order neurons. Then they make it all the way, these go all the way up to the brainstem. This is a good example of an idea of how long one individual cell can be. From the bottom of your foot all the way up to your brainstem is one cell, okay, one neuron that long. But it's going to, in this particular example, it's going to synapse right here with second order neuron. This one's from the foot, this one's from the hand, but same thing. Okay, these are second order neurons. And remember, what's that word? Notice it also crossed from the, which way are we looking at this? The left side of the spinal cord to the right. What do we call that? When it crosses over? Okay, when neurons cross from one side to the other, whether it's in your brain or in your spinal cord, we call that decussation, which is crossing over. So, you guys have heard that, right? If you damage, let's say the right side of your brain, you lose feeling and motor in the opposite side of the body. Not all, but most fibers decussate from one side to another. Has to do with a weird thing. If you take developmental biology, very early in our development, there's like a twist of something, that most animals have, and it crosses over. But for now, just know that happens a bit. But the synapse means we synapse from the first order to the second order neuron. The second order neurons make their way up through the brainstem, the rest of your brainstem, and they're going to go to the thalamus, okay? In my video, I talk about the thalamus being like the relay station. All this sensory information comes up and gets to the thalamus. And the thalamus is like, oh, where are you coming from? The foot? Okay, you go to this part of that. Remember the funny looking guy? On the post-central gyrus, you're from the foot, you go there. You're from the hand, you go there. You're from the knee, you go there. Okay, so it makes its way up. It's still coming up here. These are second order neurons. They're going through the brainstem, the pons, past the cerebellum back there, through the midbrain, and then up into the diencephalon to the thalamus right here. The thalamus, right deep in between the two hemispheres of the brain. Second order neurons coming up. They're going to synapse with your third order neuron, which goes to the thalamus too. There's the funny looking guy over there, with the big hands and the big feet. He's right on this primary somatosensory cortex, which is the post-central gyrus. Okay, so that's first, second, third order pathways. Now, that's like, for most things that we're going to feel. You feel a feather tickling you, you touch something, you feel it, you're going to consciously feel that. But there's lots of other sensory information that we don't really feel in our cortex that we perceive and we have to be conscious of. For example, we're going to talk more about this in the next chapter, but proprioceptors are receptors that are in your muscles and joints that tell your brain a muscle's contracted, a muscle's stretched, a joint has weight on it as opposed to another one, so we can keep track of our posture. Your positional sense of your body is your proprioception or proprioceptive sense. So look, this is something called a muscle spindle. We're going to learn in the next chapter. And it senses if a muscle is stretching. Let's say like the muscle in the back of your neck is stretching because you're falling asleep. See you out there. Okay, and it says it's stretching, and we're going to respond by, snapping your neck up, right? Okay, but, so that would be this. Look, it's still sensory, so this is a first order neuron. This is just another example. You don't need to know every single thing about this, but look, it's sensory. Look, it goes through the dorsal root ganglion. This one comes in, and look, it doesn't go all the way up like this one, all the way up to the brainstem to synapse with the second order neuron. It does it right there. It does it right when it comes in. Second order neuron now, second order neuron. That's the neuron that makes it way all the way up, all the way up, all the way up. Now this one, look, it never makes it to the thalamus and the conscious part of your brain. This one only has a second order neuron, and it goes to your cerebellum. Cerebellum is for balance and posture, keeping track of that, making sure we, keeping track of what our body is doing, so if we need to make corrections, we do that. So that there could only be a first and a second sometimes. Third goes to your cortex, where you're like aware of it. Yeah.
Sorry. So when the neuron decays, when it turns,
Yeah.
the order changes?
When it synapses, look, see first, let's look at this one here. First order neuron, synapses with a second order neuron. In this one, the first order neuron comes in, it doesn't synapse yet. It goes all the way up and synapses here, see? In the medulla, the brainstem. Now it's a second order neuron. Second order neurons go up, they synapse with a third order neuron.
That example with the neuron from the sensory receptor all the way to the brain,
Yeah.
would that be PNS or CNS or is it?
Okay, so the first order neuron starts in the PNS, always, okay? The first order neuron is from a receptor in the peripheral nervous system. The second it goes right there, now it's in the central nervous system. Yeah, it's like it travels both, but the second and third, or in this case just the second, they're interneurons. They're only in the central nervous system, okay? So I think here's another example of another one. Look at this one. Again, just an example. You just need to know what is meant by first, second, third order neuron. Not the specific spinal thalamic pathway in the spinal cerebellar. You don't need to know those. But look, this is a first order neuron. This one happens to be for pain. Okay, the other one was just touch. So these neurons that sense pain, yeah, they still come all the way up the leg. First order neuron, dorsal root, right? Sensory. This one again, this one does synapse right away with a second order neuron. The first example we had, it went all the way up and synapsed with a second order neuron. This one does it right here as well. And it does another thing that this one did not do. Notice this one never decussated. It stayed on the same side. This one did, but all the way up here in the brainstem. This one decussates right away. It decussates to the other side, right at the level of the spinal cord. It goes through that middle section of the gray matter called the gray commissure. Goes to the other side. And then it jumps into, notice this column is different. The other one was back here going up, you know? This one decussates and goes in like the lateral area here. It's ascending now. But this is a second order neuron. It's already synapsed down here. Second order, again, just you can kind of disregard that one. It's just showing pain from the hand. Second order neuron going all the way up through the medulla. It goes up, brainstem. Still second order neuron, still second, and then it gets to the thalamus, synapses with the third order neuron, and depending what part of the body is from, the thalamus says you're from the foot, you're from the hand, you go here, you go there, and we consciously perceive it, right? Now there's going to be, we're going to see in the next chapter, there is going to be, let me just delete this stuff real quick, okay? So we have this signal, someone puts a match under your foot. It's not nice. But you step on something sharp, you cut yourself, whatever. That signal is going to follow this pathway up to our brain. You're going to feel it eventually, right? I mean, it doesn't take that long. But even quicker, what's going to happen is this is also going to synapse. This is going to synapse with another neuron. That's going to come right out and go to, your leg muscle. That's going to pull your foot away. Or in the hand, you touch something really sharp, you touch something hard, you're going to be, I've said this before, you're pulling your hand away because of this reflex, this very rapid reflex that is going to make you pull your hand away from whatever's painful, pull your foot up from whatever's painful. That's it. You're also going to have this pathway going up to the brain because you're going to feel that. You want to be aware, hey, what just happened? That reflex is there just for protection. That's like a very primitive part of any nervous system of any animal, even the most simple jellyfish, They're going to move away from something that's painful. They're pulling away from it. But we want to perceive it also to know, hey, what just happened? What did I just step on? What did I just touch? I should be more careful. I should watch out. I shouldn't leave that open with his kids, or things like that. So, but just know what first, second, third order neurons mean. You do not need to know the specific pathways. But based on its name, if I just said the spinal thalamic tract, is that sensory or motor?
Sensory.
Sensory, right? Spine to the thalamus. Going up. Okay, motor pathways, descending, efferent, motor. So don't worry about direct and indirect, pyramidal, non-pyramidal. I'm not going to go into that, okay? All you need to know is upper motor and lower motor neurons. So let's just say, don't worry about pyramidal cells, but, I should just, Okay, don't worry about pyramidal cells, but you should know upper motor neurons. So a signal, remember in the frontal lobe, we're gonna plan, what do we wanna do, what do we wanna say, how am I gonna move my muscles? We make the plan. And then we have the primary motor cortex, which is the precentral gyrus of what lobe? Where's the motor lobe? Frontal, okay, of the frontal lobe. So that's where that starts. Okay, we want to, flex my bicep muscle. Okay, so that's going to come down from that part where the guy's arm was, and it's going to come down, and then it's going to synapse before it leaves the spinal cord. It's going to synapse with a lower motor neuron. It's kind of like a second order neuron, but we give it a different name. So sensory we use first, second, or first, second, third order. Upper and lower for motor. Upper starts they all start here, primary motor cortex. They come down through the spinal cord. They're going to synapse with a lower motor neuron, which is in the ventral horn of gray matter of the spinal cord. And this is going to go out to skeletal muscles, neuromuscular junction. Primary motor cortex, frontal lobe, comes down. Now there's different pathways also. Some motor pathways, some cross over, some decussate. In the medulla, a lot of them do in the medulla. There's an area called the pyramid. Anyway, a lot of them decussate there, but they're gonna synapse here at the level of the spinal cord. And notice, look, this one decussated down here. This one decussated up there. This one, but eventually they're gonna synapse with the lower motor neuron, LMN, right, LMN. This is still the upper motor neurons, right, upper motor neuron. And it's gonna synapse, notice, look how it comes out. It comes out the ventral root, right? Motor, not the back. The back was sensory coming in. And that's gonna go out to the skeletal muscle. Neuromuscular junction, yep.
When is the decussation occur?
When or where?
Yeah, when? I know this is supposed to be your spine, right? Cerebrum?
Yeah, so this is just showing some of these,
Which side?
some of these tracks for certain types of sensory or certain types of movement, motor. Some of them decussate up in the medulla. Some of them decussate in the spinal cord right before they come out. Same thing with the sensory. Some decussated right when they came in. Some went all the way up to the medulla, then crossed over. Some never cross over. So I just want you to know what decussation means. You don't need to know specifically for each different type of pathway, like, oh, the corticospinal tract. No, you don't need to know that. But just what decussation means, what upper and lower motor neurons mean. And I can ask a question like, I just did it, but let's say the cell bodies, the soma for upper motor neurons are located where? Precentral gyrus, postcentral gyrus, medulla, or spinal cord. You would say the precentral gyrus, that's where they originate. What if I said, let's go back to the sensory one. I'll even put a picture up. Where are the cell bodies of third order neurons located? The cell bodies of third order neurons. These are my third order neurons. Where are their somas? Where are their bodies? In the thalamus. They're in the thalamus. Second order neurons come to the thalamus, synapse with the dendrites and body of the third order neurons, and then it goes to the postcentral gyrus. Okay, the primary somatosensory cortex. So just follow some of these tracks and know, again, first, second, third, for sensory, upper and lower for motor. Just know where they are, follow some of these pathways. Okay, I think that was close to the end of this. Yeah, okay, so that's it. Let's pick up with chapter 13. And we're just gonna, we've kind of seen what's happening here, but let's talk a little bit more about the pathway that some of these neurons take. And I'm probably gonna take some of this out as well as we go, I'll let you know. Okay, so this is all the structures outside the brain and the spinal cord. All the receptors, all the different types of receptors that we have around our body and inside our body for different types of information. The neurons, we call them peripheral nerves because those neurons that are coming up through your arm, they do go through an organ called a nerve. They're not just neurons mixed in with everything. They're more exposed to damage, right? As opposed to a neuron, I should say, going up your spinal cord, protected by your vertebra, and in your brain, protected by your skull. It doesn't need all that, extra connective tissue around it like a nerve. But we call them peripheral nerves. Ganglia, I'll get into a little bit later. And of course, efferent motor endings, the neuromuscular junction, or a synapse between a lower motor neuron and some effector, muscle or gland, or something like that release neurotransmitter. Okay, so we're over here now, and we are in the PNS, and we're going to see we have sensory information coming in, we have motor information going out, somatic again. Somatic goes where? Somatic neurons, motor, go to what?
Skeletal.
Yeah, skeletal muscle. You could even write voluntary. And then autonomic or visceral motor, remember we call this visceral motor, is going to go to smooth, cardiac. I'm writing, I'll just write muscle. That little M with a period means muscle. Smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. So this is your autonomic, involuntary autonomic nervous system. These are the two divisions we'll cover in chapter 14. So let's start with the very end. Let's start with receptors. We have a little receptor here for touch, whatever it might be. And what happens is the stimuli and these different types of receptors are, sort of, I think the right word, programmed, whatever it is, for a certain type of stimulus that causes little potentials that are going to move towards threshold. They're like local potentials, right? What we call them receptor potentials. There's all kinds of names for them. Local potentials, receptor potentials, and if there's enough stimulus to get it to threshold, it's going to send an action potential along this nerve. This is obviously a first order neuron, right? It's the neuron coming from a receptor. That is a first order neuron. We also know that people have different thresholds, right? You talk about people who have low pain threshold, everything hurts, or some that have very high pain threshold. And you can actually numb that, right? Were we talking about someone, a grandmother, puts their hand in the boiling water, grabs a potato, like, how the hell do they do? Like, they've done it so many times, they've like deadened these nerves that, you've adapted to it, either by damaging it or just your brain goes, hey, this person's doing this all the time. It's obviously not a dangerous situation where I need to, get out of trouble. It could cause problems because you could be that type of person, grandma, pulling the stuff out. But then, you get your hand on the hot stove and you go for a few seconds, and then you probably the reason you pull away is you smell flesh burn. But anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit. So we have all different types of receptors. We can classify them in various ways. What type of stimulus? We have pain receptors, temperature receptors, pressure receptors, visual receptors, auditory, whatever. Then also where they are in the body. We have receptors all around in our skin and just below our skin that tell us about the outside world. We're going to call them exteroreceptors. And then we have all kinds of receptors deep inside our body in our organ, like a pressure receptor in your carotid artery that can tell your blood pressure pushing against it. We have chemical receptors in our brain. We talked about that. Is our calcium too high or too low? Is our sodium too high or too low? We have receptors for like a pressure receptor, or almost like a touch receptor, but it wouldn't go to the conscious part of your brain, like when I touch something with my fingers, but maybe in my stomach. Oh, food just dropped in here. Okay, we feel it. Now it sends a signal to secrete some acid or secrete some enzymes to digest the food. And then we can also classify some receptors are very, very basic, just like the dendrites of a neuron. Some of them are kind of very specialized, especially the special senses one. hearing, smell, vision, which we're not going to really go into detail on. All right, so classifying by stimulus type, we have mechanoreceptors, which is a group of receptors that respond to physical changes. So think about it. We've talked about synapses in terms of a neuron releasing a chemical, a neurotransmitter that binds to a receptor, opened up a channel, sodium goes in, depolarizes a little bit towards threshold, right? That's what we've been talking about. But in this case, physical pressure on a neuron can actually open up those sodium channels and start to depolarize. It could be touch, it could be pressure, vibration, even stretch. Physical changes to this neuron. We're going to go over a good example of those, the ones that are in our muscles that tell us if the muscle is stretching or contracting. It's like a coiled nerve ending, kind of specialized, and it sends action potentials like this. It's always, in your muscle, it's always sending action potentials like boop, 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 up to your brain. But if the muscle stretches, it sends them faster. Boop, 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 boop. It makes it send it faster, and your brain perceives that as, oh, I'm tilting, I'm tipping over here. All right, so mechanoreceptors, thermoreceptors, you can tell from its name, detect temperature changes. Temperature changes will open up ion channels and cause depolarization. Some of them are going to be for cold, some for hot. Photoreceptors, those are only found in the eyes. Those are very specialized. We're not really going into detail. I'm just giving an example here. They respond to actually photons of light hitting them and opens up channels. Chemoreceptors, again, chemicals. That could be to smell. Those are chemicals. You're smelling different odors. These cells respond to them and send signals. Taste, blood chemistry. Those are going to be your internal receptors. This is the only one that its name doesn't really tell you what it does, but these are pretty important. Nociceptors are for pain. Just associate those two. Pain. And this could be, we could have like temperature receptors in our fingers that tell us, oh, this is a little warm, it's a little cold. But there'll be nociceptors right nearby. If it's like extreme heat or extreme cold, you'd feel that as pain, right? And those signals are going to be more of like an alert to that part of your brain. You feel something, this tabletop's a tiny bit cooler or warmer, whatever, than the rest of the room, yeah. But am I really consciously aware of that and like thinking about it? No. But if it was extremely hot, all of a sudden I touch something like, ooh, that would be a nociceptor. Would have that type of response to that. Excessive pressure, just a little touch like this. Again, I put my hand down, I'm not thinking about that consciously. But someone hits my hand with a hammer, yeah, that's extreme pressure. I'm going to feel a nociceptor is going to send that signal to a part of my brain that says, hey, something bad just happened. Chemicals, some chemicals just, smell, odor, or just testing the chemistry of your blood. Yeah, you're not consciously aware of those things usually. But, maybe a cell where there's inflammatory chemicals, you have an infection because there's bacteria, let's say you have an infection in your foot, and you start to get, when you learn about the immune system, some of these first cells that get there, and even the cells that are damaged by the bacteria release chemicals. It's like, they die and they burst. Those chemicals stimulate nociceptors, and you feel pain, right? And it's a good thing sometimes, pain, even though it doesn't be negative, because when you feel pain, hopefully you're going to do something about it. It makes you pay attention to it. I should go see a doctor, or I should get this checked out.
So if it's like neutrophils and stuff like that?
Yeah, like those cells that you're going to learn about, neutrophils, a type of white blood cell or something. When they encounter a pathogen, not only does, the cells that have been damaged by the pathogen, the bacteria, a virus can cause a cell to explode open, and make copies of itself. The chemicals that get released stimulate nociceptors that make us feel pain. The neutrophils or whatever, other macrophages, phagocytes, yeah, they can also release chemicals on purpose that cause pain.
When they're engulfed in the bacteria,
Yeah. They might also say, hey, there's a lot of this going on, release pain, and then we're aware of it, and we go, hey, let's go to a doctor and get some antibiotics.
Is this what painkillers kind of
receptors?
Yes, absolutely. Painkillers of different types, when we learn about different painkillers, they affect different parts of that pathway. It can affect both the receptor level, it can also affect the perception level of pain at different parts. Okay, so those are by stimulus type. By location, just generally we have extero from, these are going to be in the, what we say like the body wall, you know, in your skin, just below your skin. You're going to have all kinds of receptors. I'm not going to make you know each different type, but they respond to what's going on outside the body. Touch receptors, pressure, pain, temperature. Okay, all of your special sense, for the most part, are exteroreceptors. They're telling us about the outside world. I see this, I hear that, I smell this outside. Okay. Then we have the heck was that? Interoreceptors, also called viscero. Remember, viscero means your organs, like internal organs. These are internal, and these you're usually unaware of their workings. We're really usually not aware of this, unless it's extreme, you know, something in your stomach. But let's say, you know, something's irritating your stomach and it's, or there's too much acid. Yeah, that can stimulate receptors that say, hey, let me let the big guy know what's going on here. Okay, not feeling well, maybe you should sit down for a little bit or find a bathroom. Okay, so these are intero, and they could be pressure receptors, like I said, in your arteries, or chemical receptors in your brain, temperature changes inside your, you know, in your brain or in other organs of the body. Internal. These are kind of in between. So proprioceptors, I mentioned before, proprioception is your position sense. Did I write that? Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, here it is. Okay. Position sense. So these are in your skeletal muscles, the tendons around joints, ligaments, things like this, that inform your brain of your position. Now, we're usually not aware of this also. Just like interoreceptors, our brain, thankfully, keeps track of what our body's doing and makes corrections when we need to adjust our posture. But extreme stuff we know, you know, big wind blowing, you're blowing over, yeah, you can be aware of that. Okay, so proprioception, location. And then we have, by the complexity of the structure of the receptors, we'll get really, really general here. Simple receptors are really just modified dendrites of sensory neurons. You know, most of the stuff, the tactile sense, they're just modified little simple dendrites. The special senses one are very, very complex. They're very unique. They're very, you know, this is chapter 15, which we're not covering in this course, so you don't really need to worry about them. Just know what we mean by special senses. Vision, hearing, taste, even equilibrium inside your ear. All right, special senses. And then some of the nerve endings can be non-encapsulated, which means just like a bare dendrite. Some of them have like these connective tissue wrappings around them that make them a little bit more complex. So encapsulated or non-encapsulated, let me just see what you need to know here. Why is that skipping around like that? Okay, so here's an example. I'm going to cross out a couple of things here. Unencapsulated. Oh, nociceptors are unencapsulated. This is just showing some examples of what I said before about nociceptors. Just know that that means pain. And they're usually by extreme temperature or pressure. Extreme chemicals, very, very acidic, very basic, you know, very, you know, abnormal pH. Whereas within a normal range, yeah, you would sense it to make changes, but you wouldn't feel anything consciously. Anyway, you know, you eat hot food, things like that can cause, certain chemicals can cause pain sensations. Okay. These are really just examples. I am not testing on this stuff, okay? These are just showing, these are some general sensory receptors, non-encapsulated, you know, just like free nerve endings in your skin, even the little, remember the Merkel discs in the Merkel cells in your epidermis? Yeah, these are just regular nerve endings. The ones that surround your hair follicles, remember I said every hair follicle has a nerve ending on it? These are very, very basic. I'm not going to test you on, excuse me, I'm not going to test you on these either. Okay, these are all examples of different receptors in our skin, and some are deeper than others. For example, like these, the Ruffini ones, they're deep. They're gonna feel like a deep continuous pressure, whereas the ones that are really closer to the surface are really for light touch. You do not, I'm not gonna test you on their names. We are gonna cover later, these are, let's just say, these are proprioceptors. And we're gonna just talk about one or two of them a little later or next time. Proprioceptors, position sense. We have muscle spindles. They tell us about a muscle if it's stretching. We have tendon receptors that tell us if the tendons in the joint are stretching. Even in the joint itself, they tell us about how much pressure is on a joint, what position it's in. Is it moving? Is it still? Anyway, just know what proprioception means. We're gonna go into some detail of this muscle spindles, so you'll need to know muscle spindles. But that's the only one on the screen you would really need to know any detail about. Again, I'm crossing this out because you don't need to know specifically. But these are examples of encapsulated. See how they have, like, around the nerve end, they have this little connective tissue around the ends in various ways. And they're a little bit more complex than a simple non-encapsulated end. Anyway, don't spend too much time on that. All right. This is a really simple concept that for some reason I put it several times on slides, but it really is. Let me just show this. Okay, the receptor level is obviously where the receptors are. That's in the, a touch receptor in the skin, or a joint receptor, or a muscle receptor. Okay, let's do this too. First order neurons, right? First order neurons from the receptor. That's the receptor level. And then we have the circuit, the way it makes its way up. That's in the spinal cord. It's making its way up through these various ascending tracks. And sometimes, maybe they synapse down here. Sometimes they synapse in the brainstem. But, let's just say if it synapsed here, that would be a second order neuron, right? To the thalamus with these third order neurons, okay? Depending where it comes from, it goes to that somatosensory cortex of the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe we talked about. That's the third order neuron. That's going to be the perception level. That's where, the information's here. Now we know, where did it come from? What part of the body? What type of information is it? How severe is it? Is it just a slight change in temperature? Is it a lot? Is it pain? Am I sensing? Am I just, is it something I need to even send to the conscious part of my brain where I'm really aware of it? My foot touching the ground right here. I'm thinking about it now, so I'm aware of it. But normally you're not. Your brain, your conscious part of your brain doesn't really need to know that. Okay. So that's all this means, really. Receptor level, ascending, and when it says processing in ascending levels, I mean, it's really just, depending on what type of information it's going along one of these different tracks, one of those various pathways up, and we know what your brain automatically knows what type of information it is based on where it is and where it came from. Okay, so that's all that is. Let's see. Okay, again, really not complicated stuff here. It may look like it with some of these terms here, but receptors are always specific for the type of stimulus and the quantitative, how strong the stimulus is, because when we stimulate a receptor, we get these local potentials. And sometimes they give them other names, like a generator potential or a receptor potential, local potential, graded potential. All of these are things that build up to an action potential. They are depolarizing a little bit to stimulate that receptor to get it to threshold. If they reach threshold, then we get that action potential, that big spike. And that's going to go all the way up. So transduction is changing one type of energy into another. We're changing physical energy, heat, pressure, whatever it might be, into an action potential. So you're converting it from one type of energy into another. That's it. All right, we know we have a stimulus, we have generator. I'm going to write local potentials. Think of them as, back from chapter 11, excitatory postsynaptic potentials. That if they reach threshold, then we get the action potential. So some of us, some of the receptors, like I was saying, in your skin are a very low threshold. It doesn't take a lot to reach them. I barely touch the tabletop here and I feel it. Whereas some are only going to be, if someone hits me with a hammer there, their threshold is much higher. It's going to take a lot more pressure to reach that, to get a signal to conduct. Yes?
That's two different receptors.
Yeah, they'd be different receptors. Yeah, like some of them are deeper in your skin. They only respond if there's like a lot of pressure on there. Whereas the ones on the very surface, very, very low threshold. And then, like with pain, with pain, nociceptors, pain receptors, just some people, their threshold is higher, where they don't, something that somebody would complain about and say, that hurt. Some people say, go to any dentist. I'm the biggest wuss when it comes to, I'm like screaming about, everything hurts. They just know, give me that nitrous. I want to go. Okay, adaptation, I really am not going to cover here. We can adapt to stimuli. There are certain neurons that, like, when you touch something with your, maybe when you first touch it, yeah, you perceive that, right? The pressure is still there, but your brain adapts to it, and even the neuron adapts to it. Your brain says, okay, so what? You're touching this lectern right here. I'm going to stop sending signals. I don't even need to send signals anymore. You adapt to it, Whereas like painful things like that are out of the ordinary, you would not adapt to it. So, they can decline in frequency or stop altogether, where they become less responsive. That's just adaptation. Okay, this is a review. This is just what I just drew there. First, second, third order neurons. Remember the first order neurons from receptor to the CNS. The previous chapter, you need to know a little bit more detail, like, okay, it comes up, it's going to enter through the dorsal root, right, into the spinal cord in the dorsal horn of gray matter, and then maybe it synapses there, or it goes up to the medulla and synapses with a second order neuron, and the second order neuron goes to the thalamus, and then the thalamus is where we have the bodies of our third order neurons that go to the somatosensory post-central gyrus of the parietal lobe. That funny looking dude with the big hands and big lips. There it is. Okay, so this, if you, definitely know that pathway. I really want you to know this first, second, third. I'm gonna ask questions on that, guaranteed. Where these neurons are located, and so on. Okay, there's that same picture again. If you want to write it in, first order neurons from the receptors. Once it synapses, we have a second, which goes to the thalamus, and then those are third order neurons to the somatosensory cortex. What do we got? Where am I? Okay, we got about 5 minutes. All right, so what is a nerve? A nerve is an organ of the central nervous, of the nervous system, peripheral nervous system specifically, because we don't see nerves in the central nervous system. And these are basically just, there's a kind of cartoony version of a nerve. This whole thing is the nerve. It's going to be very similar to like a muscle, obviously smaller, but it's got a connective tissue wrapping around the whole outside. Remember the connective tissue, the epimysium? We call this the epineurium. Where is it? Epineurium. And we have bundles called fascicles of individual cells. But these bundles are separated by perineurium, not perimysium. Mysium was muscle. Perineurium. Okay? And then inside the fascicle, each neuron is a little insulated as well with connective tissue called the endoneurium. Now, this happens to show a neuron in there that's also myelinated. See the myelin sheath? And there's the axon. That's the actual cell. Okay? So, same exact layout as a muscle. Epi, peri, endo. Just put neurium instead of mysium. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't have a question.
Oh, you sure?
Oh, no, I just felt like it's the same as
Yeah. Same exact, same terminology, same layout, very similar to that picture of the muscle. Here's a diagram. You know, if a cross-section of a nerve, you see the epineurium out here. You can kind of make out, you see how this is like one bundle there, and like another bundle there. Those are fascicles. Okay, and they're separated by perineurium, like in between this one, something like that, okay? And then you have each individual neuron surrounded by endoneurium. Each one of these. Some of them, see how some are bigger, some are smaller. The bigger ones conduct, what are the bigger ones, faster or slower?
Faster.
Faster, bigger neurons are faster. And myelinated, but you can't see myelination here. Okay, so just know those terms. There they are, written right there. Connective tissues. Most nerves are mixed, just like I showed you, and I mentioned before. Nerves can contain, you know, if you looked at a picture like this, you know, maybe this neuron is a sensory neuron. It came from a receptor. It's carrying information this way. But this one right here, this could be carrying motor information. Okay? So most nerves are mixed. They have both sensory and motor. But there's certainly several examples of nerves that only contain sensory information and some that only contain motor nerves. Mostly these cranial nerves that we're going to learn about next time. I was hoping to get to it today, but we're going to go over them when we get back, and I'm going to give you guys a little extra credit assignment that you can do. Okay, so real quick, an example of an only sensory nerve. The nerve that goes from your retinas of your eyes to what part of your brain? Occipital lobe, good. Those are just sensory. We do have motor nerves to the eyeball. Those are different. Those are to move your eyes, you know, up and down and around, and to make your pupils go like this and that. But the nerve that carries vision from those rods and cones, you ever hear those? Those specialized cells, rods and cones in the back of your eyes? Anyway, you don't need to know them, special sense. But those are only sensory. The nerves from your ears to your temporal lobes, those are sensory only. Some are motor only. There's some of these cranial nerves that only contain motor fibers. We'll go over a couple of them, but most of the nerves in your body are mixed. They contain both sensory and motor, going both ways. Let's end with this, just 2 minutes. So there are some, like I said, there are some pure sensory, some pure motor, but most are mixed. And let's just do this. So the type of fibers, you can have afferent and efferent, and somatic and visceral. So let's review that. Somatic afferent, well, afferent means what? Sensory or motor? Sensory, okay? So this would be sensory from, because it says somatic. Somatic is, I'm going to say exteroreceptors and proprioceptors. I like to say this is from like the body wall, which includes your skin and your muscles. Okay? You know, so exteroreceptor, touch, pressure, all those things out there, those are somatic afferent. A lot of times we'll be conscious of it. Something we touch, something we feel, you know. Not always, right? But joint position, muscle position. Somatic efferent, somatic motor, where do those go? Somatic.
To the skeletal muscle.
Skeletal muscle. To skeletal muscle. Just using M as an abbreviation for muscle. Okay, voluntary, if you want to write that as well. Voluntary motor. Okay, visceral afferent, sensory. Visceral, so I'm going to say, we'll write sensory again, sensory. This one's motor, obviously, efferent, but sensory from, it's visceral, internal, we're going to say interoreceptors. Okay, a neuron in your small intestine that senses, hey, food just came in here and now I need to secrete more digestive juices or whatever. Those are visceral afferent, usually completely unaware of these things, usually. Interoreceptors, viscera, internal organs, right? And then visceral efferent, what was the other name of our visceral motor division? Chapter 14? Autonomic nervous system. So this is going to, I will say motor because it's efferent, right? Motor to internal organs. And we're going to be specific here. This is where we say smooth muscle. You know, Ofu just got here. That comes from visceral afferent. Oh, there's so let's squeeze the intestines to push the food through to the large intestine. That's visceral motor. I'm not consciously aware of that. That just happens. So smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, make my heart beat faster or slower, and internal organs or glands, right? That's a good kind of review of almost the first slide of chapter 11. We talked about different parts of the nervous system. Knowing what somatic and visceral mean, afferent and efferent. Okay, if I have a video going over the beginning, what I just did today, I'll post it for chapter 13 just to review.